The reading this evening is taken from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 to 16. Verse 1. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus, they bring judgment on themselves, because they have broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much, Tim, for praying for me and for us as we come to this part of God's word. And look at these verses in 1 Timothy. So do open that, 1 Timothy chapter 5. And we look at verses 1 to 16 together this evening. I think most families probably have their own codes of conduct, don't they? Or advice that you have that may be specific and peculiar to your family to navigate different family relationships. Maybe it goes like this. If Uncle Barry sits next to you at a family gathering, don't ask him about his health. You'll be there for hours on end as he pores over his various ailments. So that's how you deal with Uncle Barry. Or we don't lend money to Cousin Carl. And because he never pays it back, if he asks to borrow any money, just say, oh, things are a bit tight for me this month, and so that you'll avoid giving any money to him. When visiting my nan, we were told, don't talk during Coronation Street. So you can talk before, but once Coronation Street starts, you mustn't talk. Otherwise, you'll get shouted at and you'll be asked to leave the room, which I used to do. I was asked to leave the room, and I used to sneak into the pantry and get a blue ribbon. When I was growing up, we were also told to call adults Mr. and Mrs. Whichever adults they were, that's what we had to do. And I remember my friend Craig's dad saying to me, do you know what, Scott? You're a working man now. You don't have to call me Mr. Addy anymore. But that was one of our family rules. And as we get to 1 Timothy, it takes some of the relationships within the church family, some complex relationships sometimes, and it gives us a Christian code for how they should work out the Christian family dynamics. So Lord willing, here's what we're going to do. This week, we'll recognize and apply the right ways to relate to one another, and also recognize and assist the right ones in need. And then, Lord willing, next week, I'll look at recognize and appreciate those worthy of double honor. So that's what we're going to cover this week and next. So to begin with, recognize and apply the right ways to relate to one another. So these verses primarily talk about how Timothy is to relate to different people in the church. You remember he's got to minister to them, and particularly he's going to have this ministry of correction. And so how does he go about it? Well, verses 1 and 2 teach him of the necessity of us, him, and the church being a community of correction. So when it comes to the family of God, us, our different individual congregations, it's not just a nicety that we're willing to correct one another, but it's an absolute necessity. If we're going to have healthy churches within the network, we've got to be willing to go about the ministry of correction. So we all know of stories of ships that have collided with one another or have veered off course and ended up miles and miles from their destination. And our lives as Christians can so easily veer off course, one little degree, but before we know it, we're miles off course in dangerous waters and can make a shipwreck of our faith. And the ministry of correction and being a community of correction is one of the God-given ways to keep his people on track. A slight deviation left uncorrected can result in great devastation. So here's the thing to begin with for each one of us. We, as individuals, must willingly receive correction and also be people who are willing to offer correction. And now that's a twofold thing, isn't it? Maybe some of us are more willing to receive correction, but we don't like to give it. Or others are more than willing to give it, but don't really want to receive it. But actually, as the church of Jesus Christ, we should both be open to willingly receiving correction from the church ministers and pastors and from one another, and also be willing to give correction too. But how do we go about that ministry of correction? Well, in these verses, we've got at least 4 groups of people that we will look at, each in turn, and draw some lessons out for us in approaching one another in this ministry of correction. So on the screen, you'll see a picture to illustrate the first principle, and it specifically relates to dealing with older men. So how do I deal with older men, and how do you deal with older men as you relate to them in the church? And the principle is this: don't be a chicken, but at the same time, when it comes to correction, don't go in cocksure of yourself. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the reasons that we find correcting difficult, and particularly correcting older men who maybe have been in the faith longer than we have, they're older and wiser, more experienced in life, and we fear them, or maybe fear what they might say back to us, and whether we'll be able to respond to them. And so we chicken out. Because of fear of man, and we chicken out and we don't say what God wants us to say, and we don't do this ministry of correction. And of course, one of the things that is established in 1 Timothy is that we must fear God above all others. So we fear God first, not man. We remember that God will hold us accountable if we've not been willing to speak up and speak a word into the lives of those around us. Even if we're younger and we see an older man at fault, we should be willing to say something. See, if you care, you will confront, even if it's uncomfortable. Okay? If you care, you will confront, even if it's uncomfortable. Now, I know some people disagree with this, and already you're thinking, well, I'm not going to do it. You can, but I disagree. But as Tim said earlier, just look at 1 Timothy. These are not my words, and these are not like helpful tidbits that some of you in the church might do if you so like. This is the instruction of God to you, what he's telling us to do and how we should operate. But as younger men are approaching older men, we mustn't go in cocksure of ourselves, all guns blazing, thinking, well, I can put this one straight. I know better than him. Oh, all those years being a Christian, and they're still doing that, or they've got that misunderstanding in that area, or they're living that kind of life. And so we go in as if we're the ones who can solve their problems, and we're going to lay it down on the line for them. We don't go in with the goal of embarrassing an older man to prove us right and prove them wrong. The goal isn't to give them a piece of my mind or get this off my chest or set this ignoramus right on this particular issue. Here's a good bit of wisdom that if you are going to take pleasure in doing it, you're probably not the person to do it. If you're going to take pleasure in doing it, your heart's probably not in the right place, and somebody else probably ought to go about speaking to that older man. Because one thing that we're certain of is this: children shouldn't go in wagging their fingers at their fathers. Okay, he says like fathers. And children shouldn't go wagging their fingers at their fathers. If you're a child and you've got the habit of wagging your finger at your parents, and you would say that you follow Jesus Christ, you need to stop it. It's dishonoring. You shouldn't do it. It's not faithful. It's not what God requires of you. As you relate to an older man as a father, you do so with humility and respect. We're to be a community that corrects one another. So, first principle, don't shy away because of fear, but don't jump in with both feet when you're correcting an older man. Next, we've got younger men. Now, one thing, younger men as brothers, it says. Now, one thing we understand about brothers is there's that natural bond, isn't there, of loyalty, striving alongside each other, sticking together. This will guard us of jumping in with a judgmental manner when we're correcting a younger Christian, a younger man. You see, I don't approach a brother, do I? Well, we shouldn't. It's hard, isn't it? We're so dysfunctional in our families that the whole idea of thinking, well, how do I approach a brother? And we think, well, you fight with them, don't you? You put them down, you get one up. Okay, but we've got to understand when it's talking about a brother in Scripture, it's talking about people who know that they're in the same family. They're on the same team. They're fighting the same battles. They're part of the same, probably, family business, and they're striving for one goal and one end. And as you correct a younger man, you do so as a brother. You're not fighting against them, but you're fighting with them for their betterment in the faith, for their sanctification, for their growth in godliness. And if you go against a brother with the attitude of cutting them up, slicing them down, crushing them under correction, then you're acting more like a bully and a butcher than a brother. So ask yourself the question when you approach a younger person with the tone that you use and the attitude that you take and the words that you use in correcting them. Do you come off as a brother who loves them, cares for them, is wanting the best for them? Or would it be more characterized of being a bully and a butcher? You see, we don't demean those younger than us. We're family, brothers, in this together. Now, what about older women? And what do we learn from treating older women as mothers? Well, I think at very least, this speaks about the motivating affection. A motivating affection. Children have a strong sense of connection with their mothers, a love for their mothers, a love that gets them to do things that they may not necessarily or ordinarily do. Love for mothers can get disinterested teenage boys to go and visit aged relatives with their mum. Why? Because out of affection for their mother. Children act out of love for mum. Love dominates the relationship. And as they go about correcting one another, and as Timothy is to go about correcting older women in the church, and if you have to correct an older woman, you should do so motivated out of that affection that you would have for your mother, which will mean you will speak tenderly, but it will also mean that you will speak. And because who would want to leave their mother in error? Who would like to leave their mother in danger? Who would allow their mother to walk down a path and that would result in their destruction? No, a son, a daughter would speak up. And even if it inconvenienced them, they wouldn't worry about that because their motivating affection for their mother would cause them to voice something through fear that something might happen to their mother. You see, it's always easier not to confront and correct someone, always. It takes effort to arrange a time to get together so you can deal with the issue. And we've been sold this crazy lie in our generation that love is somehow spontaneous and effortless. But if you love someone, you'll inconvenience yourself to help them, to help the other person become what God wants them to be. And so if we're going to go about as churches this ministry of correction and relating to older women, and we'll inconvenience ourselves out of a strong affection for them, because that's what you would do for your mum. That's how you would treat your mum and operate towards her, and you would do it all in a tender way. And then we got younger women. What can we learn here? Let me say two things that hopefully will be helpful on that practical level that Tim was talking about. And that is that we need to, one of protecting them, and the other about protecting yourself. So that little picture there, you've got three young boys, and they've finally a girl's come into the family, and they say, "We will protect her." Okay, they don't realize that she's going to become the greatest difficulty in their life at this moment, but they just think, we will protect her because she's our younger sister. But at the same time, you have to protect yourself. So let's take the first one. Sisters need protecting. They need safeguarding. And it's our job to protect those who are vulnerable. It's our job to look after younger sisters in the church. And we care for people's spiritual well-being, like an older brother caring for a younger sister's well-being. I remember, unfortunately, most of my fights at school were because of my sisters protecting them. Oh, apart from my older sister who used to protect me. That's another story. But most of my fights at school were protecting my two younger sisters. They got into bother. They weren't always in the right. But I knew that if I came home and said, "Well, I didn't do anything about it, Dad, because they weren't in the right, they were shooting their mouths off," I then would have got it in the neck from my mum and dad. So I stepped in to protect them, whether innocent or guilty, because that's the job that you do. You step in to protect. And correction is a way of protecting people. And we protect younger sisters in the faith by offering them the ministry of correction when they're in error, when they're living contrary to God's design for them. But we must also protect ourselves while doing that. We must be on our guard lest we get dragged into any particular sin. It says, as sisters, with absolute purity. So that's a warning to be on our guard as we go about the ministry of correcting. We don't want to fall into the same sin as them. We don't want to fall over the cliff. And if you don't want to fall over the cliff, you don't go too close to the edge. I think probably for Timothy, we're probably aware of what Paul is thinking and the kind of difficulties that the younger women may have been getting into, and how Timothy as a younger man could have fallen and pray to that when correcting him. But I think it goes across the board that in correcting anyone, whether an older man, a younger man, an older woman, or a younger woman, we must be careful not to fall into the same trap as them as we go about the ministry of correction. So look to protect others, and particularly those younger women in the faith, but protect yourselves as you do it. So God wants every believer to be involved in this ministry of correction. Often as brothers and sisters, we'll see somebody off course, they don't know about it, and God calls us to correct that person in love. And so if we want to be healthy churches across the network, Christchurch, Orchard Park, Riverside, Newland and Hessel, each one of us must be committed to willingly receiving correction from the ministers, the church leadership, and from one another. And we must be willing to give correction, and because that's what a healthy family does. But secondly, our church code of conduct will help us to recognize and assist the right ones in need. So we're looking now at verses 3 to 16. When I first worked for a church as a ministry trainee, it's etched into my mind. I remember sitting in the study of the minister I was working with. I'd been there a couple of months. I heard a knock at the door, and this guy asking if the minister would give him some money because he needed to get a train ticket to go visit a dying relative. And he just turned around and said, "Not today, mate," and closed the door. Anyway, as he was coming back to the study, I was absolutely shocked. I genuinely didn't know what to do. My head found it difficult to reconcile the truth that a church should be loving, and here my mentor, who I'd signed up to be with for 2 years, sending this needy guy packing. And I thought, what are we going to do? And he quickly explained to me that guy turns up a number of times a year with different stories that never add up. Always to do with a dying person this, or a dead dog, or whatever it might be, asking for money. And then years later, at the church I worked at before we came here, we found out that a couple had taken the congregation for the tune of £4,000. Collectively, a couple of £100 there, several £100 here for different individuals. And when we finally found out and we got it together, we realized that they'd taken the congregation for a ride to the tune of £4,000. Now, these verses talk about widows and a specific list that existed for looking after them. And the church has a duty to support needy widows. David Lloyd-Jones once remarked, "The truest test of a civilization is the way it treats its old people." And I remember years ago reading this report, I don't know if it's true still today, but although China had the highest percentage of old people across the world, it had the fewest number of care homes. And because they look after their aging relatives, they don't just pack them off to a care home. And the church should be the place where older people are cared for. Okay, so let me just say that. The church should be the place where older people are cared for. However, the church's purse and the wallets of individual Christians are not just wide open for anyone to dip their hand in. So people have responsibilities, and the church must recognize and assist the right ones in need. So did you notice, just look down, there are 4 types of widows in the text. So we put it like this on this list. There are those who can get on the list. They're the widows who really are in need, and it's repeated twice. Then there are the widows who lived for pleasure, verse 6. Then you've got the widows who have biological family, verse 4 and 16. And then you've got the younger widows in verses 11 to 15. So the church should care for widows, that's established. But it's not enough that you are a widow. Paul says to Timothy, check what type of widow they are before you help them. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So what type of widow are you? And I think this is a hard question for Christians to deal with. I think the vast majority of churches don't really do it very well because they've not worked hard enough on 1 Timothy 5. In my experience, individual Christians and churches largely fall into 2 camps. The first camp is this, those in the determined to support camp. Determined to support. And their mantra is, help everyone. That's the Christian way. That's Christian love. So we're just ready to help. Who needs helping? Come the church's way, come my way. We're ready to help. And then there are those who are in the dedicated to suspicion camp. And their mantra is this: hold fire. That person's probably taking you for a ride. And so those people are reluctant to help. So largely speaking, this is my experience of individual Christians in churches. They fall into one of those two camps: determined to support or dedicated to suspicion. And in my Christian life, I've pitched my tent in both camps, definitely, over the years. That is, until I found the field of 1 Timothy chapter 5. And I found the discerning in service camp with the mantra that goes like this: help those who have helped others and now have little help from others. So help those who have helped others and have little help now from others. And that's Paul's instruction to Timothy. So the needy widow, the widow who is really in need, should be cared for by the church. If you look at verses 9 and 10, it's really clear. It basically just builds up this picture that you've got this widow, and what does she do with her life? She has cared for others in her family and the saints and those who are doing the ministry within the church. And Paul says she must now be taken care of. It's a shame if you don't look after that widow. But in contrast, there's another type of widow, verse 6, and they have lived for pleasure. She cared about her own needs and luxury, and Paul says she must not be propped up by the church. We don't like that, do we? Just be honest. We say, okay, yeah, we'll do that. But really, if you brought someone to me, and you said, I really think this person needs help, and I went round and chatted, and I asked about them, and I said, no, we're not going to help them, because they've spent all their time looking after themselves. They've not given really properly to the church. They've not really served. And now in their dotage, they want the church to look after them. And Paul says, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, no, they're not to have the resources of the church. Most of you say, oh, wicked old Scott. Horrible person, isn't it? We always knew he was like that. We always knew he was a bit that way inclined, wasn't he, to just be harsh to people. But actually, this is just the requirement of Paul in the wisdom of running the church. But then you've got the widow with family members, and it says she should be cared for by them. She spent her life looking after them. She spent her life caring for them. She spent her life giving to them. And now they, in turn, should look out for her and give to them. Because in doing so, you're honoring the 5th commandment. Honor your father and your mother. So those who really need go on the list, and they cared for the church and now are cared for by the church. Those who lived for luxury, well, they're now to find their own means of looking after themselves in their old age. Those who've got biological family, should the biological family has a responsibility, and particularly if the biological family is Christians, have a responsibility to look out for them. And then you have the younger widow, who basically she still has means to get support. She can use those means, and that means is marriage, to live a productive life. And these verses that seem a little bit complicated, but they're not really. And when it talks about this list, because you've got to see the list as not only a list that the church holds and says, well, who's going to get onto it, but also a list that people want to enlist themselves to. And what I mean by that is that these women are saying, look, I'm going to dedicate my life to the church now. I'm a widow, my husband's gone. Put me on the list and I'll serve the apostles and I'll wash the feet and I'll practice hospitality and I'll follow them around and I'll do this. And Paul says, that's all good and well for somebody over 60 because they probably will do that for the rest of their lives. But this 26-year-old girl who's been widowed at a young age, she's going to put herself on a list, pledge herself to do that, and then a guy's going to come along and she's going to break her pledge. So just don't let her do it. Just say, you know what, you're young enough, you can get married soon, you can have a guy to look after you, you wait for that, you do it that way. And in that way you don't dishonor Christ by breaking your pledge. Now, from these verses then, and these 4 types of widows, we can glean some biblical principles for caring for the needy in the church. Here's number 1. Here's number 1 principle for the 4 congregations as they think about their family funds and as they think about helping the needy and doing mercy ministries. Those who have cared for the church must be cared for by the church. It's to our shame if the elderly saints are neglected. We should pledge and commit ourselves to always making sure that those who have worked hard for the church, that we work hard for them in their old age, so that they're loved, cared for, and provided for. Second principle, those who have been consumed by the world mustn't consume the church's resources. So the church is not here to prop up someone's standard of living. If they had no desire to support the kingdom work and when they had means to, then the kingdom's resources shouldn't be used on them when their resources run out, okay? So if you're thinking now, and if that bothers you because you're an older lady and you think, well, I've not really given to the church, I've not really served the church, but I was hoping in my older years that the church's resources will be coming my way. Well, if I'm still alive and I'm leading the church, it won't be. It won't be, okay? It won't be. You either commit yourself now to being a faithful servant of Christ and contributing to the church and showing that that is your passion, and then the church will passionately support you. Or if you've lived for yourself, and then when you're older, you have to provide for yourself. That's principle number 2. Principle number 3 is your duty to care for older members of your family. So too many people are humiliated rather than honored by their families in their old age. There's an old Dutch proverb that says this: it seems easier for one poor man to raise 10 children than for 10 rich children to take care of one poor father. Isn't that the truth? And Paul says that should not be the case in the church. In Christian families, that should not be the case with Christian families. You see, it's a pleasing aroma to the Lord when families look after their aging parents. And to not look after your aging parents, then Paul says it's a foul stench in God's nostrils. Principle number 4, if there are other ways of getting support, then you should be open to pursuing that and doing something about your situation. So we need to be loving and firm, and the advice here from Paul is both wise and practical. When he says to the younger women, don't go on the list, it's saying because there are other ways that you can do that, and it's probably more sensible and wise in the direction that your life will take you. And so if there are other ways, in 1 Thessalonians we hear about another way, don't we? Don't receive support from the church if you can what? Work. Work instead, okay? That's the means open to you, okay? So we have to think about the other means that are open to us in order to support ourselves. So the church is not to turn into some welfare agency supporting those who are not serving or could carry their own load. So let me conclude and summarize the teaching with 2 challenges. The things that we've looked at. Firstly, in our churches, as we seek to grow as communities of correction, we must take care not to apply one-size-fits-all approach to correction. So Timothy mustn't correct everybody in the same way. That's what we said, didn't we? Everyone needs correcting, but the manner by which we go about it changes. We approach some as fathers, others as mothers, some as brothers, some as sisters. So the church's correcting ministry should be universal, but not uniform. Universal, we must correct everyone, but not uniform, not correcting everyone in the same way. Okay, so that's a principle that we must take our stand on. But secondly, in our 4 churches, as we seek to enlarge our hearts in practical love for fellow believers, we must take care that we enlarge our hearts wisely so that our love, support, and care are exercised in accordance with the wisdom of 1 Timothy 5 and other scriptures that speak into this. Therefore, the church's helping ministry must be tangible but not gullible. Tangible but not gullible. So we must work hard to make sure that our family dynamics are determined and directed by the Word and not by the world. So, as Tim said, practical stuff from God, from his words about how we go about the ministry of correction and how we go about the ministry of helping. So we'll spend a few minutes now, we'll leave this slide on the screen, and just chat a little bit about what it will look like to improve in this ministry of correcting with that principle of universal but not uniform, and what it would look like to go about that ministry of helping that's tangible but not gullible because it's applying the wisdom of the Bible. So just a few minutes chatting about that, and then Tim will come up and close in prayer. Thank you.